Hello, everyone. This is Ed Breniger, and welcome to the Eddie Network podcast. This is a little introduction as I'm waiting on Andy to Wilkins to log in, and I can tell you that we're just going to start from wherever we are, and we're going to keep talking. And I think you're going to find it very interesting. Andy's an incredible person. I have told him that I see him as a trailblazer. I think he's doing things that most people who are talkers, people who stand up in front of people and talk, and are not doing. And he's really crafting a perspective that I think is valuable. And I think you're going to find that coming out. And so thanks for watching and enjoy this episode of the Eddie Network podcast.
There is a challenge of education, but there's also a disruptive force of AI appearing in the world, and those confluence, what will that mean? And I've been asked to give the keynote for that. Well, so much as I've been doing in my work on healthcare, which when I was looking at futures, I was not looking at, I decided after staring at a blank sheet of paper for a long time, both terrified and excited at the same time, that it isn't about the future of hospitals and the future of primary care. To answer the question of health, you've got to go back to first principles. What is health? Because
Mhm.
we can't answer that question of what we mean by health and good health. And how do we know a health system is even adequate to the challenge? Otherwise, we're just patching up a legacy broken model and calling it health, when in fact, it's largely a sick care, not a healthcare system. So there's a huge chunk missing to what a health system could do. And so I was inviting me to do this attempt to do a similar thing on education. What is education for? Is it just school for jobs? But if the AI and robotic transformation is going to come along, maybe those jobs won't be around, or if they are, they'll be changing rapidly and evolving quickly. So what is it that we need to know, not just for work, but to be a person, to exist in a family, in a community, hold and honor one's culture and take that forward? What are the other forms of knowing that are going to be important if we think about education from first principles? And what might AI do to assist us in that? Or would it predate on us in ways that diminish the quality of human experience? These are all like fundamentally important questions. It's not a case of just bolting AI onto our existing education systems and thinking job done. I think it does call for a more fundamental rethink. What is it to know anything? And what should we value in that?
I've had the thought for a long time, and I was in higher education for a while. Um, and I've had the notion for quite some time that we we're having a hard time escaping the industrialization of education, and we should
Mhm.
be embracing the education as an entrepreneurial endeavor, and that we should be teaching children when we teach them math and language and those skills that we teach them as a way of expressing themselves in tangible ways, like teaching a child who's a third or fourth grader how to start something and to say, okay, if
Mm.
you have an idea, let's start a project and let's see if we can take your math and your language study and apply it to, oh, what would you like to do? Oh, you would like to help some older people do something, to put it into practical terms, and that and it
Yes.
really this really kind of became a tangible thing for me when I was in Vienna in 2017 at the Peter Drucker Global Forum, and uh,
Mm.
and I'm standing there having lunch on Friday it's the last day of the conference, and these three high school students came up to me, and they were there for the conference. And I thought, well, this is interesting. And so I started asking them questions, and it turned out they attend a business high school in Vienna. And I
Wow.
said, I'm going to be here all next week. I'm going to be in Vienna all next week. Why don't you invite me to come to your school and give a talk? And one of the girls said, okay. She gets on the phone. She calls her teacher, who's somewhere else in the building, and the teacher says, well, let me call the headmaster. She calls the headmaster, and he says, well, if you think it's okay, we'll do it. And so Monday morning at 8:45, I show up at the school and I get 15 minutes with the faculty. Then I go to a class on digital marketing, starting a business, and then I get 120 students and faculty for an hour after that to talk about Circle of Impact. And I was so
Wow.
impressed by that. And I went back the following year. I came and I went back, and it was the day that all their businesses that they had started were showing off their products and things like that. And I'm thinking, why can't we do that in third grade or
Yeah,
seventh grade instead of waiting till 10th grade?
exactly. Exactly. It fits a little bit John Vervaeke's sort of participatory knowledge, isn't it? There's
Yeah,
propositional knowledge. We teach stuff off the page, but go and do it. That's when you learn it. Learn
yeah,
by doing.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And when I speak to these young people about that sort of thing, oh yeah, that's exactly what they'd like to do. So, and they're having to do that
Yeah.
because they
Get
have to
out there and engage in the
survive in
world.
the world. So, yeah. And so the reason why I reached out to you because I was interested in a couple of things you had posted on LinkedIn about this conference on systems and thinking and systems practice. And I would love to have a
Mm,
conversation with you about that sort of thing because I think it's one of
yes,
the more sensitive touch points of change that we're going through in the world.
exactly. And it was a, a fabulous opportunity to be in the presence of many systems thinkers, both from academia, practitioner, and even from business and government, all coming together to discuss what is systems thinking, what are the ideas that animate it, and where is it being used, and where is it being used well, and where are all the areas where perhaps we should be thinking and acting in systemic ways. So it was great to both listen to all the speakers talk about systems thinking from a right the way from Stafford Beer's work with Allende and the Chilean government, right the way through to much more practical examples and contact centers and things like that. So there was everything from nation building to running businesses.
Yes.
Is, of course, public services, health was a big area, and I got the chance to give my little talk on systems thinking in health. So it was a fantastic opportunity for me to share some of the work that I've been doing, trying to bring more systemic and systems thinking approaches to healthcare.
Well, let me ask you this. Let's get into this way. I see that the systems of the world are very fragile. And I was curious if you see it similarly, and in what way are they fragile? What is it? What does fragility look like when a system is not being rigorous and resilient and
Mm.
anti-fragile? I guess using Taleb's uh, concept.
Well, this is something we've known about for a while. I think about uncertainty, whether it's volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity, the VUCA world, and there's other acronyms that are used to describe similar phenomena. But in general, one could sort of distill it down to the world is changing faster than most organizations are able to respond to. So there's a widening gulf between what organizations and institutions do from those organizations and institutions. And there is a degree of tension and alarm, I think it would say, and maybe even crisis in many organizations and institutions. But there is an instinct to double down on the thinking that got us here. And when you unpack that a little bit, what you see is very linear ways of thinking. A causes B causes C. So we just need to pull the lever, and there's a causal chain of things. And a lot of that in systems thinking terms comes down to the sort of mechanistic way of thinking that, which is the industrial logic. Lots of top-down hierarchy, transactional thinking, linear process. Pull the lever at the top, and things happen. But reality is becoming more complex and dynamic, and that sort of top-down linear way of doing things has less grip on the world. I think so. Even where institutions in the past, this is starting to break down. But I think there's another class of problems that we see in the world that aren't being addressed at all by the way that we do things today. So one can think about that is that most organizations, institutions deliver products or services that are usually quite narrowly conceived. They do a thing or a couple of things. But when we look at the challenges that we face around climate change or the mental health of our children or the health and well-being of people or what is education, and there is no one solution to that problem. It is a complex problem. And a complex problem needs a solution set that can match that complexity. So what it really is an invitation to start to combine things, to pull things together, to work together, to collaborate around some of these more difficult challenges that are out there in the world that have been left to fester because we haven't been able to address them properly and are now becoming so critical that they demand our attention, and the old ways of thinking cannot address them. So systems thinking is an invitation to stop thinking like a machine and start seeing the systemic nature of the problem and the systemic nature of the solution that would need to be brought into being to be able to speak to and engage with that. So those are perhaps two areas where we see systems thinking arising as being perhaps an important set of capabilities for leaders to have at this current moment.
Is it, I'm going to put this in a different type of language, but is there a problem in the fact that we're trying to treat all of these things as sort of abstract problems instead of real world problems that the dynamics of real world problems don't don't align very easily with abstractions, but they align very well with observation and seeing things as actually what is going on.
Now that's a very good point, and there's abstractions at a number of levels, and of course some of the more complex phenomena require you in some way to sort of take a step back and see the pattern in the system to be able to understand what the hell's going on, because to try and chase every bit of a system would to leave you in utter confusion. So there is something of being able to understand the nature of the problem by seeing its systemic nature. People often talk about complexity as being sort of, whoa, we don't really know what's going on here. Simplicity being something we always desire to bring to the issue, but if you oversimplify your approach to it, you're not understanding the inherent complexity that's in nature and therefore, or in reality, and therefore whatever you're going to do is not going to be able to address that. I quite like this sort of middle point, which is clarity. Is there a patterning in the complexity that allows us to understand how maybe to shape or steward that complexity? I can't control it, but maybe I can shape it and steward it in a way that points it in a better direction. So there's that level of abstraction. But I think in traditional ways of doing leadership, there's also another layer of abstraction that gets in the way, which is those who work in organizations, institutions, whether they're teachers or frontline workers or production workers or health workers or whatever it might be, they are dealing with the complexity of the reality of what they're facing, what the organization is facing, what it's there to do. But as you start to abstract from that, so the frontline report workers will report to their manager, who would report to maybe a regional manager, report to a national manager, report to the board. You're getting levels of abstraction on top of abstraction on top of abstraction. So the people who have the decision-making responsibility have less insight to the nature of the reality of which that organization institution is there to serve. And therefore, suboptimal decisions are made in the absence of understanding the reality, which then just compounds the inability of an organization to speak to the change in complexity that we're seeing arise.
Yeah, I see it exactly that way. And the kind of the hierarchical nature of these old legacy institutions means that the people at the top are in a very isolated state rather than a very engaged state. And that's a and I, as a consultant for the last 30 plus years, I saw that and I found it was very difficult to overcome that isolation for a host of reasons that had nothing to do with my project. It was just the way things were. But when the person who was the CEO or the CIO or whoever was in kind of in charge made the decision that I'm not going to be in isolation. I'm going to walk out of my door and I'm going to go get on the elevator. I'm going to go down to the bottom floor of the building and I'm going to go talk to
Exactly.
those people. and find out who they are.
Yes, now understand more the nature of the reality. Yeah, the nature of the reality that we're dealing with, and I understand the consequences of the decisions I'm making, so I can
Right.
be more informed and wiser. But again, a real kind of interesting framing of why this is a problem across all organizations. Excited recently to have a chance to chat with my favorite philosopher at the moment, Forrest Landry, and he loves to deal with triples like Charles Sanders Peirce for the American pragmatist, who
Yeah.
saw the sort of relationship between threes as being more fundamental to reality. And he talks about the triple of extraction, abstraction, and accumulation. So let's just step through this. Extraction is whatever we decide we're going to do in the world, there's reality out there, but we take some points of information out of that reality, a subset of that, which we then use to create a product or a service. And then we measure that product or service. So we've now extracted a piece of reality, not the whole. We've abstracted it into a service or a product. And then we accumulate, which is then we look at the metrics on that service that usually are money and costs, and then the power sits at that abstraction layer, and the decision making sits at the point of least information about the reality that we're meant to be serving, because you've taken information out of reality, you've abstracted it, uh, uh, and now you've abstracted it. So decision making is made from the point of least knowledge about the reality that we're meant to be serving. So no wonder we struggle, and no wonder in a faster changing world, we cannot, through that route of decision making, ever really engage and attune with the reality that we're there to serve. So I find that an incredibly clarifying mechanism for understanding why linear thinking through abstracted hierarchical organizations optimizing to money cannot see the reality that they're meant to be engaging with, and therefore making suboptimal decisions, causing the kind of chaos we're seeing around us.
Do you think you could take those three things and instead of making them linear, making them a circle where all three of them must become aligned with each one of them has to be aligned with the other two? Does that make any sense?
Yes, it is. And those involved in abstraction need to connect themselves back into reality
Yeah.
to see what it is that reality is calling for, such that the abstraction, the services, can be more finely attuned to that reality. So yes, this needs to be a self-learning system, not a way of insulating decision making and power from the very reality they're meant to be serving, which is our current dilemma.
Because that's what I created with my circle of impact model, where you have three dimensions of leadership: ideas, relationships, and structure. And what emerged from that, I didn't see it at first, but then it emerged as I did more problem solving with organizations using it. I realized that, well, if you defined the problem as one of those dimensions, then the other two dimensions become the resources for solving that problem. And in doing so, that's how you end up aligning it. So if our problem is
Mm.
extraction, or if our problem is accumulation or whatever, then the other two are the resources we bring in to kind of
Yeah,
bring clarity to the system.
yeah. Well, this is where I part of my challenge back to the systems thinking community, and I think I've expressed that at least in one of my posts about it, is that
Yeah.
bootstrap a broken model of extraction. Like we can find better ways of extracting.
Right.
And to use systems thinking for that is to breathe more life into the model that at the moment is not fit for purpose and causing so much increasing
Right.
amounts of harm, damage, and confusion. Really needs to situate and ground itself is understanding the system's nature of the problem. Like the more that we can understand the reality that we're trying to serve, the more likely we are to find solutions that can speak with respect and honor and dignity and create value for that. And I've found systems from within can be incredibly complex. There's lots of vested interests, there's lots of operational infrastructure, there's lots of processes. People are very resistant to change those things because you get paid to do those things well, not to put them at risk by trying to change them. Found in my work in health, for example, that the most effective way to change a complex system is take a position outside the system. Go and sit with the people that the health system is meant to serve, understand what they're going through in more detail, understand their lived experience, what matters to them, and use that insight to form the system about where it to serve that. Then the system has a story around of which it can gather and reconfigure itself to attune itself and serve the people it's there to meant to serve. So often a position from outside the system is the best way to change the system.
I totally agree. And that's, yeah, as an outsider in almost every one of these situations I've been in, that's what I found to be very true. And I think that's what we're finding emerging from, I don't want to say collapse or crisis, right? I don't want to use any of those words. I just see that this is a part of the adapting to a changing world, and that's what we're doing. We're adapting, and it may mean that we have to change a lot of our beliefs or assumptions or language, change a lot of things, behaviors, but we're still just doing what we've always done, which is we adapt to the changing circumstances that face us every day. And when we take a positive attitude towards that, we find positive ways of addressing that.
Yeah. What what's also interesting about these times, though, is that granted, sometimes what it is to be a human being, we've created a world where jobs are jobs and we buy things, we drive economy. We've all been willing participants in that model, and we haven't had to think too much about what it is to live a good life, what it is to be a good person, what it is to act in a way that's generative to myself, to my family, to my friends, to my community. It's just the act of participating in the machine has been enough because we've got more wealth and better retirement plans, etc.
Right.
But now that's coming under threat. There's a need to question that model and question maybe in the future maybe there won't be as many jobs, and therefore what is it, what is the meaning of our life, what is it to live a good life if I can't be assured of work or a career anymore? And then alongside of that is coming the obviously the rise of artificial intelligence and AI. And what's been interesting about that debate, as well as the power and the possibilities of AI, is that it's asking questions: what is intelligence? And then the next question is, what is human intelligence, such that we can have a view on whether we've reached artificial and general intelligence. So it's forced us to sort of shine the light back on ourselves to ask deeper questions of who we really are and what really matters. And I think that side of things is to be welcomed. We've become more critical and reflexive on what life means and what it is to live a good life and what it is to be human and what it is to be an intelligent creature. And how do we see and understand and honor that in this coming world? Many of us thinking about that question in a way that perhaps there wasn't the space or the interest in thinking like that maybe 10, 20 years ago.
I agree with you. And I think I think it means that we have an opportunity to rethink everything, and we can say rethink how we do systems thinking. Um, and I'm not saying I know what that looks like, but
Mm.
I think if we take the attitude that everything is always up in the air, open to redefinition and reconfiguration, then we will find it much easier to go through these changes that we've um,
Yeah.
suffered under.
But but I think it also register, and I use that word cautiously. I'm not meaning necessarily traditional religions, although absolutely included. But when more things are possible, or maybe anything could be possible, or maybe dark things have become possible, what is it that we truly want? What's most sacred to us as individual humans, as families, as communities? It suddenly thrusts that question back on us to reflect more deeply about what kind of world would we want to usher in, as opposed to being done to by more sophisticated technology and organizations using that technology to sort of predate and extract value from us. It asks us, what would a flourishing humanity look like? What would we value and want to nourish in that context? What is most deeply and profoundly important for ourselves and for our children and our children's children and those to come? This is a question that can't be easily answered by science, nor is it answered by business. It comes from a deeper and a different place. And I think to think into that, to feel into that question opens up a much more profound conversation in society about who we are and who we wish to become in a world of ever greater technological power.
What I see, I know, and I'm now putting my minister's hat on, is that there is a distinction that needs to be made between um, the communities of these religious faiths and the institutions of religious faith,
Yes.
because the institutions are very similar to the secular institutions of business and of the arts and government. And so there's these two things that we're talking about. And for me, I'm just going to oversimplify it to say we're talking about institutions and we're talking about human community.
Hmm.
And out of the human community, expressions of faith emerge which are meaningful for people, and it bonds them together in a communal relationship. Where businesses, they have a different function, but they have been kind of the dominant force in our world for the last 200 or 300 years, and
Yeah.
so and I think that's changing.
It is, and this is where, again, the work of Forrest Landry I found really helpful, because we think about institutions as a form of technology. We
Yeah.
created organizational ways of being that allow us to do things we couldn't have done ourselves, and through that, hopefully, some benefit would accrue to us. And most businesses and organizations were set up to create something that would be valuable and useful, and hopefully increase the well-being of the people. But as we've industrialized both our organizations and our institutions, what we've seen is a shift in what institutions were interested in. Instead of serving, it's becoming performance related. So over time, an organizing logic has taken over our institutions, which is increasingly becoming extractive of us and extractive of the planet to serve the interests of the institution. And and as we put exponentially powerful technologies into those institutions, uh, something quite dangerous could occur. So, and probably will. So, as Forrest Landry talks about, if we talk about people, planet, and technology, surely a future that we would want is one where there is a flourishing humanity. But a flourishing humanity needs a flourishing planet. It's the substrate on which we depend. We come from nature. We are of nature. If we destroy the substrate that we're built on, then there is no flourishing humanity. So the third leg of that stool, our techne, everything that we built, needs to shift from being extractive of us to be in service of a flourishing humanity as a kind of meta North Star. And it doesn't matter what religious persuasion or secular persuasion, I think there's a credible case that we could all gather around that as a vision of the future that we would like to see. So the question then becomes, how do we bring our institutions, organizations back in service of a flourishing humanity and a flourishing planet? And the only way to do that is not from decisions at the top abstracted away from reality. It's to care more deeply about the people that we serve, to see, to connect, to relate, to listen, to attune what we're doing to what drives individuals. What is it that communities need? How can we be in service of that, such that communities themselves can flourish? And if communities flourish, then society flourish. Society flourishes, humanity flourish. So I think the reverse of extraction, abstraction, and accumulation, we need to swap the model around so that we care more deeply, we listen more deeply, we attune what organizations, institutions do to be in service of that. And through that, we can grow, communities can grow, society can flourish. And the power of our creativity is now directed towards that as an orientation, as opposed from extraction. But this requires a different shift, a different sort of God of which which we worship. Uh, is it money and extraction, or is it deepening our care? And the thing is, that if we do that well, you can make money. You can be highly successful from doing what people really need and want. But how do we create that creativity, that interest, the depth of care to light up the desire and the creativity to fulfill that and build the organizations and institutions of tomorrow that are attuned to us as individuals and as families and communities. That feels like the meta challenge around where we are at the moment.
It sounds to me that the question that we're moving towards is what kind of leadership do we need in the future?
Hmm.
And I'm curious as to how you describe that leadership. What does that look like to you?
Well, I think that a word that comes to mind a lot from the work that I'm doing is wisdom. And wisdom is the ability not to think in a linear way with one optimized. If you're wise, it's to be able to see there are multiple perspectives at play. There are multiple people involved in anything that we're doing. What is it that's important to people? What do they value? How do we lean in and seek that and understand that and think about what we can collectively do about that? I think there's also a question of timeframes. What's been really interesting in my work in healthcare, for example, well, just to sort of give you one example of it, is if you talk to healthcare leaders at the moment, they say, oh, we haven't got any money, we haven't got any money, we can't do anything different, we can't do anything new because we haven't got any resources, we just got to keep doing what we're doing. Now, you zoom out a little bit, as I've been doing in the UK on the healthcare system, and if you keep doing what you're doing, you keep getting what you're getting, and with an older, sicker population with more things to prescribe, your costs are going to go up 4 to 5% every year. And in 10, 15 years, you've doubled the cost of your healthcare system and you bankrupt the country. So when you compress time horizons and make people make decisions in the short term, you get one frame of reckoning that would seem to justify making a certain set of decisions. When you take a step back and look at the longer, bigger arc, you see the very decisions you would have taken in that yearly frame are the very ones that will undermine you and possibly destroy you in the longer term. So this ability to see the bigger picture, to see the longer arc, and to listen to multiple perspectives, to understand how to start pulling these together in ways that can speak to the needs of people, that can unfold over time towards something better that we can all hopefully agree on, requires a kind of power of stewarding and a power of holding uncertainty, living with complexity, not rushing to short answers, but orienting also to the, I think, the one that I'm using, this notion of, is what we're doing contributing, yes or no, to a flourishing humanity on a flourishing planet? If we can attune to that, then we're more likely to be making the right decisions for the shorter and the longer term. But we've got to have values. We've got to have some principles that guide our action. We've got to have some kind of vision of the future that we've involved multiple people in participating in. And then possibly there's the opportunity for wise action in order to steward that future. But this is the antithesis of how leadership is usually run and rewarded, incentivized today. It's short-term performance, it's maximizing bottom line of money or power in the short to medium term, which then shifts largely to short-term behaviors that are extractive, that meets those short-term goals, that reward leaders, but end up doing harm to us and ultimately to the institutions themselves, because they are sort of self-harming by detaching from their intimate and nested relationship with reality. So it is hard. It needs courage. It needs a whole new cadre of leaders that are in short supply at the moment.
As you talk about this, and I think this is really important, that's one of the reasons I wanted to have you back on is because I want to hear you say this to the world. Um, are you are you finding that this line of thought, this train of thought, this collection of ideas that you have just described to us is resonating with a ever widening group of people?
Yes, I would say for, and I think you probably have even more experience than I do of this. Speaking to the young is such a rewarding experience because there is a belief and a sense that what we're doing now is not right. There is a better way of doing things. There is a hope, there is a desire, there's a passion to do something better, and that spirit of wanting to do better, I think, is incredibly important and is an innate part of the younger generation. But without knowledge of what to do and how to do it, that enthusiasm can dissipate quite quickly into cynicism and resentment, and we can see a lot of that around. But what I sense with people in power today is that there's a growing sense that whatever we're doing today isn't working. I sense working with leaders across various institutions that in some ways leadership and managing those functions has become a sort of performative task.
Yeah.
This is the way the game works. If I play the game well, I get recognition, I get money, I can get a bonus, I can get promotion. But I don't really believe in the game anymore. And now, if you go home and you switch on the TV and you see what's happening in the world, or you listen to your children, mommy and daddy, what's going on? What are you doing? To say, well, I'm just going to participate in perpetuating a model that is broken. I talk to many leaders who know that the world is broken, but what they don't have is a new story around which they can convene and gather. So without a sense of what the new is, I hold on to the old because I don't know where to go. So I'm hoping that the work that I'm doing, the work that you're doing and others are doing is starting to congeal around a new way of working, a new way of being that can gather more people to believe, to see, to be inspired, and to have the courage to come out and participate. And if we do this well, I think there's a much better future waiting for us. But we've got to have the courage, the care, the wisdom to do it. And I think by many of us who are sensing into this and seeing the possibility of this, to start to tell the stories, to pull together the ideas, to build something of what that bridge to that better future might look like, will give the courage to the wider masses to follow.
I totally agree with you. And I would say that what we need to do is find mutuality with younger generations. And I'll give you an example. Walked into my normal coffee shop yesterday. Went in to spend some time editing, doing some editing, and sitting there was this young woman who's a college student, and we've had some really fantastic conversations. And she went to Taiwan during her spring break, and I went over there and said, "So tell me how was it?" And she told me all this stuff about going there, and she said, "Well, how are you doing? How's your book coming?" And I told her what was going on, and so there's this mutuality that we have, that we recognize that we're both in the same spot.
Mm,
I may be 50 years older than her, but I'm at the same spot she is in the current world that we live in.
yeah.
And I think that one of the ways that we address this is for people who say are over 50, decide that their goal is not to retire. Their goal is to reinvent themselves and have a third half of their life emerge that will maybe carry them another decade longer in life than slowing down and just kind of taking it easy and you know driving around the country. Like, well, I do that too, but of really seeing that your work life is over now, I'm just going to relax, because I think that there's something that's not as healthy when you stop
Yeah.
seeking to achieve something. And I'm not saying achieve more money or something or fame, but achieve something which becomes a legacy, which is transferred to future generations. That's that,
Yeah.
and so I think that's part of what I see. And the other thing I see is that um, we've had this very siloed and compartmentalized structure of corporations, and it's not working, and we know it's not working because of all the large numbers of people who are being reduced in force, and I'm sure you know some, I know some, and And it's because they were never understood. They were always understood as simply resources instead of these are people who
Yes.
provide leadership. And that the way to talk about this is to say, if you're the CEO of an organization, you have a new job, and your new job is the facilitation of leadership throughout your company, where you flip the pyramid upside down, and the real force is in the that flat bottom, which is now the flat top.
Absolutely. Inverting that, I think, has to be the way to go. And if you just look at it biologically, the human brain is the most complex thing in the in the universe. As the possibilities for our creativity and our imagination are almost boundless. Yet we take our people and squash them into the sausage machine of bureaucracy and stop their thinking and their creativity and their care because they've got to obey the bureaucracy to enable people to release them to create, to care, creates a huge amount of creativity and possibility. And releasing that, I think, becomes an incredibly important part of how we rethink our organizations for the future. But it does mean letting go. It does mean trust. It does mean nurturing the relationships between people. I chair a lot of customer experience conferences as a sort of side gig to what I do. So I get to see how organizations are sensing into how do we nurture and cultivate trusted relationships with the customers we sell. We need to move from a transactional model to a relational model, one where value is exchanged and created, not just taken. And how does technology play a role in that? How do we see the human in that story? Because ultimately, the deeper that we understand and demonstrably care for our customers, the better business we will have.
Yeah.
And when you sort of strip it back, as I often talk to them about, a business then or an institution is people coming together to serve other people. The technology and the process are all the adornments we put around that, but it's people coming together to serve other people. So how do we create the conditions that people can come together for that to be a creative, generative process that attunes in and makes possible caring for other people and serving other people, i.e. the customers or the citizens or the patients, in a better way? We get those dynamics and those energies right, magic happens. If we constrain and lock them into bureaucracy and transactional thinking, the opposite happens.
So let me ask you one last question. And I think there are people who are watching this who are wondering what we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Because we're talking about something that's very complex, it's high concept, but it's also something that they know intuitively because they're living their lives. So what would you suggest to people they do if this is heard as an invitation to think about something or to reflect about something? What would you encourage them as a place to start? How do they start reflecting upon these large issues that we're talking about, so that they may find a place to take their first step in maybe becoming an agent of positive change?
Well, not everyone is in a position to change the nature of the world or the consequences of large institution organizational structures. Some people are, and that's great that they can, but many of us aren't. The circle of influence we have is maybe much more localized, much more constrained. But I would say that the if we do want a better, more beautiful, more flourishing future, then there's something about care for each other that lies in the heart of understanding and unpacking what that calls us to do. And I know in Christian faith, love is everything. Love is the greatest and love is the strongest. And I think the older and the wiser you get, the more you see that to be true.
Right.
But love in the Christian faith has manifested itself in agape. And I was really fascinated in listening to John Bavecki give a definition of agape that I hadn't quite appreciated before, which is not just a, a sort of blind love or kindness, a sort of niceness, a sugary niceness. No, agape is a love that seeks the betterment of the other. What can I do
Mhm.
to do something that can help you become the best version of yourself? And that's a directed love. That's a love that requires attention. That requires a love that listens, that understands, that knows what to do. But in doing so, there's a joy that you get from
And it
helping someone do something, become better in themselves. And that yields insights that allows you to say, what more can I do? What can I do more for this person? What can I do more for my family and my friends? And the insights that you get from that, just those experiences, give you a superpower that you can put to work, not just in your everyday life, in your social life, but also illuminate possibilities in the working life as well. And it's infectious. When other people see it and feel it, they are drawn to it. It's an energy that can start to unfurl the possibilities of we've been talking about. So no matter how small you start, there's a role for all of us.
and I would add to this, and this is the hard side of agape, is that it does require us to be willing to sacrifice for the other.
Yes.
And what I have found in my experience of faith is that those situations where I've had to sacrifice is where genuine joy and happiness come from. And so happiness is not
Yeah.
something
Isn't that the
that you
paradox?
acquire. Happiness is something that is given to you by your own giving to others. So,
Exactly. Exactly.
well, if we could just
And
go do that, I think that would be a great start. I think and that I totally agree with you, Andy. And so glad that you have been with us today. And look forward to seeing how your uh, your work expands because it's obviously now that you're going to go to India and you're going to talk about education. I look forward to hearing how that all turns out as well.
well, well, the thing that gives me cause for hope is that more and more people are interested in the work that I
Yeah,
do and those hard in the sort of transactional, sort of old money first types are probably listening to me being a little bit cynical and like, what's the matter with him? No one's ever going to go with a get real, Andy. People in these ideas. And I'm being invited to speak at more and more conferences. People are sensing that the old order is breaking down. And in some ways, there is nothing there. The future that would unfold by doing more of what we do today doesn't lead us to anywhere other than a dark place. So now is the time for these ideas to be born and given oxygen, and more people are coming to them. So I think there's some cause for hope, albeit with many, many challenges ahead.
I very much agree with you. Well, thank you for being with us and send me whatever you want to send me to kind of give us some stuff to look at and to kind of chew on and encourage people to
Yeah.
imagine what is possible. Because and I may take the the two things that you posted on LinkedIn and edit those into a something which I could then put on the show notes or stuff like that. Because I think
Yeah.
all of that is really valuable. And that's what I found. I mean, I copied it off and I have a file now of your thoughts there because I think it's really valuable. And we need to kind of seed our imaginations with the kinds of things you're talking about. So I wish you well.
Mm.
I hope I don't wish you celebrity, but I wish you that you find that your your thoughts are resonating far and wide,
Mm.
and that people are doing something with what you're describing.
But that's the challenge for me, and also the measure of the success is nothing to do with me. It's whether these ideas resonate and
That's right.
something happens in the world, and that's very much what I'm hoping I might be able to spark is some change in thinking, a change in consciousness, and a desire to step in and take up the cross and do something valuable in this era because boy is it needed.
I agree. So thank you, Andy, and thank you all for watching. And I hope this will inspire you to think more deeply and more practically about how your life matters in the world that you live in. And we'll see you next time here on the Eddie Network podcast. Bye bye.
Bye bye.